Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
The year is 3013. The galaxy is scintillating in the mellow light. Two galactic pilgrims seek out vistas in the samurai future to bring forth the unity of the cosmic shaman. Opening the door of the pantheon of mystics, the evil sorcerer wizard powers the engine of science, seeking to forever alter the sacred balance, traveling on effervescent balls of summer fire.
This week, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock.
In the year 1982, Star Trek needed another sequel on the cheap.
That's it. Sorry, I thought there was going to be a follow-up, because now we're up to 1984. It's 2 years later.
I think this might be my least watched Star Trek film.
I've seen it quite a bit, but...
Not because I dislike it or anything, it just seems to be the one that I can skip.
Yeah, today's film, of course, is Star Trek III. I think everyone on this conversation today probably loves it, but it is sort of the red-headed stepchild of the original franchise, in a way. 5 being the one I love 5 too, but it's the one we don't talk about, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I can watch 5 out of, like, appreciating the ridiculousness of it, whereas 3 it's not quite good enough or bad enough that I want to watch it.
Well, let's get into the thick of it. This is Matt.
This is Luke.
Welcome to the
Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
Yes, and today, when we do Trek has such a fantastic fandom, and Trek fans, Trekkers, or I still like Trekkies myself, we're all willing to talk to each other, so we have one of the guys that knows everything today. I've known him most recently listening to the Trek Files podcast, where he goes through Gene Roddenberry's old files, finds interesting things, and makes some insights on those. In the 90s, he wrote the book, The Companion for Next Gen, and you may have seen him actually playing McCoy on Star Trek Continues, which I quite enjoyed. This is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek. Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for having me. Yes, but be careful how you put people on pedestals. Sometimes they get nosebleeds and fall off.
Yeah, but if someone comes on, you got to give them a good introduction, right? That's the least we can offer.
Yeah.
That's the least we can offer. But, yeah, we'd like to talk a little bit first about how we got into this movie. I've said it on this podcast before. I guess this is the second, maybe non-animated film I saw in the theater. It's weird. I remember we saw Star Trek III on opening night, and we saw Return of the Jedi very late in its run. So I don't remember which one was actually first. I'm going to assume it was Jedi, but I would have been 5 years old, and I have a distinct memory of stepping into the Genesis planet because we were about 5 minutes late. And, for a 5-year-old, that's as good as like a Disneyland dark ride. So,
yeah. Well, so you're saying so these are your first two. Do you remember which one made an impact? Did they blur together as far as, it's a space movie, it's a space movie? Or did you had distinctions when you were 5?
Oh, my dad had me, keyed into Trek. The thing that I had confused, I had all the Star Wars toys, so Trek didn't have so many toys, right? So that was one distinction. The other one is that being 4 or 5 years old, I actually thought that the original series and these movies were being made, concurrently for some reason. I couldn't work out, there had been, 15 years in the meantime. So that was kind of funny.
You were 5, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds completely stupid now, but...
No, but I mean is you had Star Wars and Star Trek totally separate in your mind as a little kid? Because you had toys for Wars and, yeah.
Yeah, whereas I had to build the bridge out of, non-colored wooden blocks, so... But hey, we do what we have to.
You and a million others, especially if you wanted a movie bridge, because they had a movie bridge toy and made about 47 of them, and they sold out quickly, and yeah.
Of the original series, that's the 47. Okay, cool.
Okay, then there were like 4 of them. They actually built and sold a movie one that looks like motion picture, but it's like everything with a motion picture. They got all these licenses, they made all this stuff, and nobody bought it, or else they didn't get it into stores right or something. But it was insane. Yeah.
Luke, do you remember encountering this one for the first time? It might have been a little hazier on your end.
Yeah, maybe I watched it when I was a kid, because my family were into Trek, and we did watch some Trek, and I've got very clear memories of watching motion picture Wrath of Khan and Voyage Home. I don't remember the first time I watched this one, so it might not have been until I was in my teens and bought all the DVDs myself.
This one, you guys are talking about the redheaded stepchild. This is like, and 5 is the one we don't talk about, and 3, it's like it's like the bland one. It's like it's the kid in the family that nobody has a bad word about, but never got, was never the scholar or the athlete. Or it's like, it's there. It didn't hurt anybody. It's just going to go off and, get married and have 4 kids and die somewhere. I mean, it's
it's like, if you think of 2, 3, and 4 as a kind of a trilogy, this one is just the middle child.
It's the middle child of the trilogy, but even, and the old meme that got started, I think Richard Arnold started, of the odd numbered ones are the off movies and the even numbered ones are the good Star Trek movies. People used to, when they really sat and thought about it, it's like 3 doesn't really deserve that, but it's like it's not as cool as 2. I mean, it didn't like, snap your head around the way 2 did. The whole, that's more like it. If you were watching them in order and waiting 2-3 years between each one, motion picture you waited 10 years for, and all the drama and the melodrama to get a movie done, and you were like, okay, I'm so glad that came out. I'm going to go see it 6 times or 20 times because we have to do better than Star Wars. But the whole time, your voice is kind of like that because it's like, I've got to. I'm excited. And that's all you knew. And then Wrath of Khan came out and you're like, oh my God.
So what was your 1984 hot take on this one? I was a kid, just like, whoa, spaceships, jungles. So
yeah. Well, my 1984 kid take was I wasn't quite a kid, but it was like, okay, it's like it didn't do anything wrong, but it just didn't like zing. I mean, it had a lot of interesting things, and a couple things we went, okay, and we were sad that Kirstie Alley didn't get to recast as Saavik, and we already knew the kind of rumblings about, well, she wanted too much money, so we didn't hire her back. And Robin, and I'd already read interviews where Robin Curtis herself is saying, well, I understood what Vulcans were, but we'd do the takes. And of course, Leonard's directing, and everybody was excited about Leonard Nimoy directing. But she would do an interview, and I remember her saying, he just kept looking at me and say, drier. And if that's how your Vulcanness is like kind of being lathered on from, if it's all external, I kind of, where Kirstie Alley had been a little fangirl and had been practicing her eyebrow raise since she was, 10. So, that did it. And killing off, having a son and then killing him off, but having the Klingons back as actual. I mean, there were a lot of the planet stuff. It was cool to see them spend all this money on mechanical effects, but it's 1984 and the mechanical effects look like mechanical effects on a stage. So, when the planet's breaking up. But it was like kudos for them for trying. It didn't throw you out of the movie. It might now, but back then it didn't throw you out. And we were just like thrilled that they were spending money on it, It wasn't a huge big Vista movie, but we were happy with it.
Having my view this day, or in the past few days, the only thing that really struck me with the effects were just some of the, like bit matrix looking or dot matrix or whatever, just the really old computer graphics.
Nobody was being visionary on the. What's amazing about this movie is people forget that this is the movie that gave, they spent tons of money on Nilo Rodis, who worked at ILM, wound up being the production designer. It's like they didn't get a Hollywood production designer, they just got the ILM guy. But all these ships that got reused a billion times all through the Berman era, even. So the Excelsior was built here. The science ship. I've just gone blank. The one that you can't get to unless you can't get to the engineering section unless you go through the cells, through the Jeffries tubes and then the cells. Yeah. The Grissom. He gave us the Excelsior, the Grissom, the Space Dock, and the Bird of Prey that is still, I'm sure, on some camera rig somewhere being filmed for something right now. No, I'm kidding. But it's like all these iconic things. Like the one thing that's a sleeper about Star Trek 3 is everybody goes, oh, you have to remember that all these iconic things that got used for 47 years, all came out of this movie. It's like they spent a third of the movie budget on miniatures, and then they couldn't give them up for for decades and decades.
That's for the original one. The budget was so big just because of the new TV show. Everything just snowballed into that budget. As for 3, though, Luke, can you give us a quick rundown of the tale of Star Trek 3?
Okie dokie. The crew of the Enterprise are in mourning at the death of Spock, and are then hit with more sad news. Starfleet tells them the Enterprise is being decommissioned, and Sarek tells them that Spock's immortal soul is trapped in McCoy's head, and must be reunited with the body that was left on Genesis. Meanwhile on the Genesis planet, which is now a galactic controversy and a top secret, Saavik and David are doing science. They beam down to the planet and find Mr. Spock's body, alive but without memories, aging rapidly alongside the planet itself. Suddenly, some Klingons arrive under the leadership of Kruge. He destroys the science vessel and captures the humans and Vulcans. I just accidentally Chekhoved that vessel a little bit. Back on Starbase, our heroes hijack the Enterprise and escape to the Genesis planet, where an exchange with the Klingons cripples their engines. Kruge kills David to show that he means business, then attempts to capture the vessel, but a clever ploy sees it self-destruct with the Klingons on board. Kirk and co land on the planet, batter Kruge, "I have had enough of you!" and commandeer the ship just in time to escape the exploding Genesis planet and get Spock back to Vulcan.
So we'll talk a little bit about the actors specifically. I guess we have to start with Christopher Lloyd, because my dad listens sometimes, and he was annoyed that we didn't start talking about Kruge when we were talking about Back to the Future. I'm like, it was Back to the Future. Why would we do that? So yes, let's talk about Christopher Lloyd here. He's an old school Klingon in new school makeup, but on that, I guess, balancing beam, he might be one of the best. Well, he is one of the best ever, I think, but definitely a idiosyncratic Klingon.
Yeah, he's really watchable. And there were a few moments where it's like he's not quite playing that snarling original series pure villain Klingon. Like the line I always remember is when Kirk says, "Oh, give us a minute," and he's "I will give you 2 minutes for you and your valiant crew."
Yeah. Or is this the one where they say, "Put him on"?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always, but that's where like the Reverend Jim almost comes out there. Put him on. Yeah. Yeah, because Christopher Lloyd was so big with. Now this was before Back to the Future. That was 86. So this is before that. But yeah, everybody knew him as Reverend Jim from Taxi, from the sitcom, and people were like, oh, he's. John Larroquette is one of the other Klingons too, and this is before he had barely been, Night Court had barely gotten big, and then he had his own show later on, but before he played Dan Fielding, the DA or the assistant DA on Night Court all those years. And he's it's almost like he's subdued as this Klingon, but it's really, later on, it's really weird that set they built for the Bird of Prey was never used again. But that high perched up throne and everybody else is around him, around the commander on the little consoles. It was I don't want to say the movie came off cheap but it looked like they put all the money into the visual effects because it's the 80s and they thought they had to, and then everything else was cobbled together landscapes and redone Starfleet buildings and and things. It was
Child Matt was definitely confused when 4 came out. I'm like, why does it look completely different now? I noticed that. So
they worked hard those 3 months on Vulcan.
Maybe the key to Klingon is casting a comedian. I mean, even Michael Dorn, once you get to DS9, he's like a one-line king. one-liner king.
Yeah. Well, aside from Christopher Lloyd here, so you had the Klingons in 5, but they were almost like, a throwaway. It was really not till you got to David Warner and Christopher Plummer in 6 that you kind of got back to this. But even by then, they'd already started showing you. That was 3 years into, 4 years into Next Generation. You'd already had Worf and the Klingons from Next Gen pulling out there. But no, I thought he was.
Is it in 5 that we see Worf's ancestor played by Michael Dorn?
No, that's 6. He's
sorry,
playing
I
the
meant
prosecutor.
6.
He's playing the prosecutor at the trial for Kirk and McCoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because here, the whole thing about Klingons and honor and the Klingon houses, that's all next-gen development. And here, he's Lord, but they were trying to give the Klingons something besides cardboard cutout villains. And he's Lord Kruge all the way through this. Like, there's a hierarchy of Klingon society, and there's, like, classes. And he's a higher class, and that's why he's it's almost like old school, British navies where you could buy your way into a captaincy or something, and the riffraff was just the poor guys, but they got away and they got taken care of, unless they sank or something, but it's like, they tried to put some hierarchy to it. They didn't quite go that way, but it almost feels like the John Ford novels that were, I think that was his name, that they were trying to try to flesh out the Klingons at the time, and then everything that developed on Next Generation totally threw that out the window. But again, it's the 80s, and you're getting a movie every 2 years, and you're lucky to get that. So,
another little moment I liked at the start when they're talking about Genesis, the Klingons, it actually really reminded me of the Klingons' motivation in Discovery, because he's saying like, "Oh yeah, wonderful, they'll create this planet for you, and all of it under the flag of the Federation."
Mm-hmm.
And
the flag of the Federation is fluttering in the breeze. Isn't that what
that's the
one.
Just one more bit on Lloyd. We just have to give him where he relishes his lines so much. I mean, that's the real key. Just exhilarating, isn't it? No one else can give those reads.
All the way through. And remember, it starts off where you don't really get it in the script, but if you read the behind the scenes in the novel and all that, Valkyris, the woman at the beginning, is his lover, is his girlfriend, his, I don't know, fiance, whatever you want to call her, and he blows her up because he's if you've touched this information, you've got to go away. And it's not just the Merchantman ship is another hardworking ship that got reused a billion times too at the beginning. But that whole early scene where she gets it for him and then he blows her away and they bid goodbye is really not your typical original series Klingon bit either, unless you go back to a little bit of Day of the Devil.
We probably won't spend too much time talking about her, but on Valkyris, I was doing a little look at the actors on IMDb before this. And her main picture on the internet comes from her profile on wikifeet.com. And it's a picture of her in a bikini where you can see her feet. And apparently that's the most important picture of her.
Okay.
Well, she's probably not wanting to, brag on her Klingon makeup. So there you go.
We've done one in Star Trek 1 and 2 on this podcast. We've talked about the main actors a fair bit, but Larry, you've done interviews. Is there any insights on 3 in particular that you may have caught wind of?
Well, I mentioned earlier on about Robin Curtis being, the new Saavik in cast, and I remember at the time, it's out there, but I remember at the time we already knew that she was playing Saavik because the corporate line anyway was that Kirsty wanted too much money. And probably what was really happening was her agent, that was her first credited role in Wrath of Khan for Kirstie Alley. And she'd been a fan and she loved it and she ate it up. And within a few months, like I'm working on this documentary, The Khan of Wrath, and she did a convention in San Francisco and she did the Houston Meltdown convention, the Ultimate Fantasy. And then somewhere soon after that, she got the word that they were gonna, or her agent got the word that they were negotiating too high, and he pulled the well, we're not budging, and they're like, okay, fine, we'll recast it. And they're like, what? Wait, guys, wait. It was too late by then. And then soon after that, she was on Cheers, and she was doing Look Who's Talking, and her career took off, and she didn't need Star Trek anymore. And most of all, she'd been the fan that was fangirling, and then didn't want the world to know it because that would pigeonhole her. So after a while, she was almost like glad she didn't get Saavik, except years later she's, I'm sure, kind of sad about it. And the rest of the world, it's like nobody wants to. It's like, well, we really liked Kirsty because she was the first image of it. So I just remember at the time going, okay, well they had a money issue with Kirsty, and her manager didn't see it out well, so they recast it, and we were all going, well, okay, but it's certainly not exactly, Robin was she wasn't coached that way. She wasn't directed that way. But she was not a fan, she didn't have Star Trek in her DNA, and she just wasn't quite as seductively Vulcan, or, Vulcan half-breed, whatever your background is, even though she's the one that's supposedly, and they've cut the scenes, supposedly part of, the whole regeneration of Spock from a kid up through a teenager is he's going through Pon farr cycles, and they had the subtext there as she makes it with him so he can survive his Pon farr. And the scene in Star Trek IV originally was going to be she stays behind on Vulcan because she's pregnant with Spock's kid. And then as the political winds changed, they took that scene out, and then they didn't even write her into 5. So, what could have been. But that's the main thing. We were talking, and Jose Ferrer, James B. Sicking is the Excelsior captain that people knew from Hill Street Blues. He's kind of playing the same kind of,
Did they name him? In my notes, I just kept writing Captain Alfonso Prick. I don't know if they actually gave him a name.
I think they did, and it wasn't far off that.
Okay.
I want to say Esteban was his name, Captain Esteban, but I might have completely invented that.
Yes.
Anyway, I was thinking about the Spaceballs crew, and I was like, nah, this is the real crew of those guys. Transwarp too. That's like New Coke. Yeah, it didn't really work out.
Well, it's funny. It's like it was too good a word. So yeah, for a long time, everybody thought, oh, Transwarp, the failed thing in the Excelsior. But then they kind of brought the word back and used it in the Next Gen era, because they would talk, especially with Voyager. Voyager's going to develop some kind of transwarp and help get back faster. And what helps retcon that is, if you think about it, people left the theater thinking that transwarp, in air quotes, was like a failure. But remember, Scotty
broke
sabotaged
it deliberately.
Right. We never saw it work on its own. All you saw was a sabotaged ship going. So it's like people made fun of it. But if you really look at it, it was probably totally fine. And transwarp, some people they changed the warp scale. The whole can't go faster than warp 10. They just redid the scale because eventually they figured out that supposedly you can't go. There's like an ultimate warp scale, top warp speed, just like there's like an ultimate zero, right? Like there's a bottom temperature to the temperature scale. You can't go colder than that. And the absolute zero is that on the Kelvin scale. And so it's kind of like the reverse. There's an absolute warp and then Voyager, threshold. Why do I keep mentioning Voyager? the threshold thing. And it's like they redid the warp scale to have an absolute zero version of the top warp maximum.
It's funny you mentioned Kelvin as well, because they also bring back the word transwarp there.
Well, yeah. So what I'm saying is, what may have happened was it's like everything is transwarp now. We don't even talk about it, or maybe there's a super hyper cool transwarp that people experiment with still. Because they kept coming up with all these experimental warp drives in Voyager every time some alien race would throw them a bone, a temptation or something.
Sorry, somewhere at the back of my mind, there's a real-world example where we did that. Like, is it with computer data we say there's bits and megabits, but now that numbers are so large, we just call the big one the name of the small one? Oh, calories, something like that. Where, the numbers got so big that we don't even differentiate the smaller number anymore.
Had to redo the whole scale. Yeah.
It's happened with currencies as well. Like, you used to have pennies and half pennies, but now the penny is the smallest one because you never go that low anymore.
Yeah, and who even goes to pennies, really? No, so the thing is, out of this movie, and that's not so much now. If you see it now, you go, okay. But back in the day, when we were getting, it was the fallow times then, and all you got of Star Trek was a movie every 2 years, and you were happy for it. And the idea that there would be more TV series somewhere, because Star Trek used to be these guys on this ship, and that was the whole, that was your thing, and you were happy to get them back finally after 10 years of fighting, and petitioning and all that. And the idea, and it was so funny because with all the hoo-ha lately of Discovery and some of the fan base pushback, and a lot of it's troll and bot, but bots doing it. But some people upset with Discovery and Picard and all that. But it's every new comeback of Star Trek after a big gap, especially if there's new people running it. there's kind of that pushback. It's like people coasted along with their headcanon, for 10 years or 12 years. And so Next Generation, there were a lot of people that looked at Next Generation as replacing Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and Shatner, Nimoy, Kelly, and their ship and their world. And it's like, no, guys, it's 80 years in the future. They did this to preserve everything you love. But a lot of people didn't get that memo until finally it became obvious. And but anyway, there were tweaks along the way here. A lot of people didn't like the Excelsior. It got the nickname of the Pregnant Guppy. And the other thing about this movie is the controversial part of it was killing the Enterprise, quote unquote, because, the Enterprise had always been a character. And I always hated the scene where they're on the planet and he self-destructs it because, especially when McCoy says, he says, by God, Bones, what have you done? And McCoy says, well, it's the same thing you always did. You had to find a way to survive. And I go, no, you always found a way to survive that didn't involve blowing up the ship. It's like, and don't tell me it's TV and we have to have it next week and this is a movie and we don't have to worry about it. It's like, I was just always mad because that was, at the time, part of the magic to me. Now we have this big, huge canvas and, we have bloody A, B, C, and D and other generations and other centuries to explore. But at the time, I was really pissed. It's like, oh, they're just doing this for a movie. And there were interviews with Harv Bennett and the effects guys, Ken Ralston at ILM, where they were like, yeah, we hated the old Enterprise. And they meant they hated the miniature because it was built in the 70s and it was heavy and hard to, they learned so much so quickly. And the Excelsior was going to be, everybody's going to fall down and praise it. And everybody hated it. They hated losing the Enterprise and they hated the shape of the new ship. And they had to backtrack real fast. But early on, they were like, oh, you're going to love the new ship. You're going to love the new ship. It's going to be awesome. It's bigger and more powerful, and we built a better model. And by the end of the reaction to it, people called it the Pregnant Guppy. And they were backtracking real quickly to the point where by the end of 4, oh, look, it's exactly the same refit design.
You can't better the best model.
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, in terms of, in canon, how long is there between the motion picture and this film?
People keep fudging about the motion picture because we used to say it was it's supposed to be 2.5 years between the end of the 5-year mission and the motion picture. And if the 5-year mission went, and after people really started getting hardcore about assigning years, and after Mike Okuda started really chronologizing things so they could make reference to it by next gen time, same thing as with the star charts and the star layouts. The 5-year mission went from 65 to 69. That sounds like 4 years, but if you've got 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, that's 5 years. And bumping it up to 64 to 68, so 2.5 years can make you 2270, 2070. This is in the weeds, I know. But the basic thing is, by the time of Star Trek, they didn't really think about the timing with these things. Although I love the scene at the time when McCoy gives him the Romulan ale, and he says 2283, why bones? And it's people all go, oh, it has a Gregorian year on the label. Well, it was supposed to be that it hadn't aged very long. I mean, you kind of got that idea that after he drinks it, it's kind of like bad, or it's really strong, or it's like just out of the barrel, or however the Romulans do it. And eventually, I don't think it was intended at the time, but eventually, Star Trek 4, they just do everything with easy numbers. And so they're running around San Francisco, and there's a newspaper in a stand that says October, 1986. And the movie comes out in 1986. So that's one thing that's obviously easy to do. They're running around in our time, which happens to be 86, the year the movie's made. What a coincidence. But for their time, they just basically make it, 300 years in the future. Yeah. I trip up on that sometimes. So they're saying that the trilogy, so if you go back and remember that Wrath of Khan happens, and then 3 months later, Star Trek 3 happens, they've been on Vulcan for 3 months, and then they fly back, and within days, all of Star Trek 4 happens. So the trilogy all happens within 3 to 4 months of itself. And if the end of that is is 86, is 2286, then people have fudged it to make it start in 85, and then this just bled over in a Terran Gregorian calendar into 2286. So but it kind of like, they kind of in the day retconned the first two. Oh, well, they must have, after they were all written and put out there, oh, I guess they did all happen within like 4 months of each other, 2, 3, and 4. So to say it's been like, basically to say it's like 14, 15 years since the motion picture.
Okay. Because the start of motion picture, the Enterprise has just been refitted. But in this film, they're like, now time to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
But 14 years, I guess that's a little while.
And it's like, wait, so are they, because we were going, so are they talking about like when it was refit for Kirk at the beginning, or like between We're No Man and, is a paint job and a lower bridge dome and new things on the back of the nacelle? Is that a refit? What was that about? Or is it before? Anyway, I mean, we all were scratching. They got so specific. It was cool. It was awesome for the background people. But then when you start doing the math, you're kind of like, wait, what? Again, it was like, you just wanted to get rid of this model. You just wanted to get rid of these sets. We know what you're doing, smart guys at ILM. You're so full of yourselves thinking you're going to come along and reinvent the Star Trek world. They
could get away with in the 80s. There's no internet.
Yeah. No, and the other thing was that Wrath of Khan started into was it was so, like, they never would have said Admiral on the bridge. And Gene's, the original Roddenberry thing of having these short sleeve uniforms and people didn't salute, and you had ranks basically to show promotions, but it wasn't really uber military-ish. And then that all hepped up with Wrath of Khan. And admirals and captains and all the officers have all this, they're dripping with gold braid and gold brass and all of this obvious, insignia stuff where it had never been that way before. And I would roll my eyes and go, oh, it's the Reagan 80s. It's just a conservative bent. And then, of course, Next Generation immediately pulled back from that and went back to short sleeves again. But that was another thing. So it was cool to see them running around in their civvies and to realize they're going to be stuck in those same civvies for the next.
Yeah, they must smell pretty rank by Star Trek 4.
Yeah. See what I mean? You hope it's not too long.
I hope maybe Vulcan's got a laundromat.
Although, Matt, as you pointed out in your notes, Kirk's civvies are almost the uniform anyway.
Yeah, they want him to still, have kind of hold his character, I guess.
Shatner only wants, Shatner only wanted to make sure he had something really distinctive. They tried to give everybody something distinctive, but oh my God, I feel so sorry for Walter and his little Lord Fauntleroy. So it's just really, he was not happy about it either, but.
One thing they did very well in this movie is I think this is the first time, and I don't want to besmirch characters on this, but we'll say the B-list crew. I mean, this is the first time they really had some nice room to have some moments with the, the tiny scene. Uhura, that may be her best scene ever as he's shoving the young buck into the closet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, some of the lines and the memes that people... Yeah, don't call me tiny, and be careful what you wish for, Lieutenant. You may get it. Which, the lines that I use all the time. There's another one from this movie. I don't know.
We get some vessels.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is how some of the things that only time shows you, and it's like how the 60s crew starts off with a very 60s TV. We got a lead, we got a second banana, and we got everybody else. And as the movies went along, they got more, and you got into like movie clout negotiating for contracts on whatever little standing they could do after the big two. Then it's like things did get a little more small d democratic, as far as giving them bits, giving them a scene. Everybody would at least say, hey, I want my own, which well, I'll get to that. And Next Gen started off as the post Hill Street Blues ensemble. And the more their movies went along, the more it turned into lead, second banana, and everybody else. I mean, it was really weird to me how they went, not to broaden this too much, but backwards. And everybody benefited except, and it starts here, poor George. It's like he was supposed to be talking about getting his own ship, and the Excelsior was supposed to wind up being his ship, and they cut the little mention of that. It's in the novelization for Star Trek 3. He's supposed to talk about he's got the Excelsior coming up, and that went away. And it's like, poor George, like everything, like they cut his... Ilea walks in and he gets a boner moment in the motion picture. That gets cut. His talking about having a command here gets cut. In Star Trek 4, through no fault of his, the little boy that's supposed to be his great whatever grandfather scene, it goes away. And they don't have time to, his little moment of stealing the helicopter, the Huey, in 4, they had to cut it for some reason. It's like, poor guy. I mean, it's like...
Oh, is that cut? I've seen that, though, right?
You probably have seen it, but as far as the theatrical release... No, the little boy, they didn't even get to shoot it. The kid was, like, upset, and they never got to film it.
Wow.
Now, the take the Huey may have been. I'm trying to remember if I ever saw that or not. But the little kid never... Yeah, it's all the scene where they walk. You see the final movie, and they're walking in front of the Yellow Pages ad that's painted on the side of the building.
Right. Yeah. I've definitely.
Right there, the little Chinese lady was supposed to come out of that building behind them, and the little kid run out, and they were going to have a little scene right there. So they were all set to do it, and they were losing sun, and they couldn't postpone it because they had such a tight schedule. Anyway, I just feel sorry for George. It's like he had "Don't Call Me Tiny." And he had the teacup scene in 6.
Yeah, it's like he got his ship, but he didn't get to be in the rest of the movie.
And it's like, yeah, but it's like that's all he got in the movie era. So it's, I kind of feel sorry for him.
I guess we've danced around them. We haven't really talked about the big 3 yet. I guess of all the movies, this one is McCoy's film, right?
Let me think. Yeah. He's kind of in the ensemble of all this, everybody that got the scenes. He's got the chemical factory in the acrylic the Plex factory in, or whatever, the transparent aluminum factory. And then he's got the hospital scene in 4. And 5 is just, I just don't even think about 5 much. I wasn't happy with McCoy in 5 either, but it's like his dad and his dad's name is David and all that, which, yeah. But you might be, yeah. And 6, they try to. He's got all the time with Kirk in the prison. He tries to say, no, he's got some good stuff here. And yes, I'm trying to think real fast through here. Oh, the whole thing about having Spock's Katra and going slightly crazy, and the rescue out of the cell is really, the bit where Kirk says, "How many fingers am I holding up?" The lore legend about Shatner cannot do the Vulcan salute. He doesn't have the muscles. He doesn't have the muscles and the fingers to do that. And they took monofilament like fishing line and tied his fingers together. So all he does is raise his hand up for just a second. And
oh, that's a good one. Yes, I definitely did not know that.
That's not very damn funny. But, McCoy's thing about getting the punchlines better and better all the way through the movie really takes off here, too. He's got, it happens more and more, too. But he's,
I guess he's the one that really gets less in the movies. I mean, in TOS, he is like one of the main actors. So they made sure to get his name up there in the 3rd season, too, right? Or the 2nd one, too. So, yeah, 2nd season, right. So, the B crew got a little more in the movies. I mean, Kirk and Spock. Well, Spock got a little less because he's barely in this one, right? But McCoy's the one that really got more, I guess, in TOS. But he had whole episodes.
Well, I think McCoy did it right by this. The other thing that's cool here, and here's the thing people don't know. At the end, when they're doing the ceremony, and Sarek says, "I'm Sarek, son of Solkor, son of Sarek." He rattles off his lineage, which people have retconned into future Star Treks when they went back in time. Like, his great-grandfather who was not named in the movie. In First Contact, when the first Vulcan stands there and comes down from the ship after it lands in Bozeman, they've retconned that with a bio that was on screen in the finale, or near the finale of Enterprise, but they've bioed that to be Spock's, one of those 2 names that he mentions there, his, great-grandfather. And then Sarek's grandfather and Spock's great-grandfather. They tried to invent a lineage for all that. But it's funny when Sarek has just said that to the priestess, Dame Judith Anderson, so they've got a little class level in there, too. And then McCoy says, "McCoy, son of David." McCoy Leonard H., son of David. It's like, ooh, we got McCoy's dad's name. And it's a funny moment. But he says McCoy Leonard H., and nowhere in any of Star Trek filmed, including Kelvin Universe, had they ever said what his middle name was or now what that H stood for. And at the time, there was a really good background fanzine group that Jeff Mandel worked with that I got into back when we had a hobby of doing that because nobody else cared. There were like 10 people in the whole world that cared about this shit. And his middle name was supposed to be Horatio, but they never say that. You know, it's the movies that give you Takai's Sulu's first, Hikaru, comes out in 6, I think. And then Uhura's doesn't come out, Naota doesn't. It was out there, but it never was on film canon until Star Trek 09, even, the Kelvin. But he says Leonard H., and never says what the H stands for. And when it was on screen, I said, oh, cool, they went with Horatio. And then I didn't realize that like 12 people knew that. And I would say that, and people go, you don't know that. You don't. It's like, why would they pick the H? They saw that fan thing and did it. And in 86, I was at when I was first able to go to out-of-town conventions and went on to interview people and come back and do it for my paper. Dee was at a press conference, one of the first times I got to talk to him at length, and I said, so what does the H stand for? And he goes, Horatio! Like, well, doesn't everybody know that? But if you weren't in that room with that recorded on tape, I mean, it's like, it's nowhere else. So anyway, there's something for everybody. The H stands for Horatio, guys.
Nice.
We brought you in for the fun trivia, so there's a lot I have not heard before.
I like to think this is much more than trivia, guys. Now, come on, this is your quality of life. This is your sanity check on a crazy world. Much more than trivia, yeah.
Well, Matt, you mentioned like Leonard Nimoy barely being in this one, yet his presence is everywhere in this film.
Well, yeah, he's behind the camera.
Oh yeah, but I just you feel him, right? You feel
definitely
Spock's presence throughout this whole film, even when he's not on screen.
He's the Poochie. When Poochie's not there, everyone has to ask, where's Poochie?
But on that subject, I do briefly want to speak about the 4 Spocks we do get in this film.
Right.
So the screams when you first hear Spock, that's Frank Welker, that's Megatron. So that's pretty cool. And then you've got the 3 actors who portray Spock at different stages of his life. There's one, the child actor, he didn't really do anything else. And the adult actor, he went on to do some like bit parts in TV shows and movies. And the teenage actor actually had a pretty tragic life after this film. Mm-hmm. Ended up dying in jail, unfortunately.
The middle one there that you mentioned, I think he did, and I've gone blank on his name, but he
Carl
has
Steven.
He's got out on the con circuit and done a couple of conventions.
Oh wow!
You know, I mean, he's not carried away with himself, but you know, he doesn't try to go out and blast him. He doesn't try to rival Marina Sirtis or something. But who calls herself the Con Queen? I'm not bashing Marina here, but but he's gone out. You know, he's limited, and when he goes out, it's kind of fun. But it's funny because the whole it's amazing because almost out of the gate, this was called The Search for Spock. So it's not like it was a big secret that, well, that means they either find him or they, find him, air quotes, or they don't.
It is a search.
So the fact that he was directing it it's not like he's estranged from everything at Paramount. He's doing the show. It's a search for him. But it's funny, the days they kept up with this pretense. All the days that he was shooting as Spock, adult Spock on the planet, or especially at the end, they had a pseudonym on the call sheets. He was Frank Force. So the days when, instead of putting Leonard Nimoy, you're like number 2 on the call sheet, it said number 2, Frank Force, I was like, who the hell is that? And back then you couldn't IMDb something, but that was their cute little way of trying to keep it, which it pretty much had leaked out by the end. So that was kind of a pointless thing, but yeah.
Yeah, this is one where I have watched this one a fair amount. I mean, when I was a teenager, it's like Luke says he goes back and watches the entire film series, whereas it takes me a week to watch a movie these days. But I've definitely rocked the Kirk Spock trilogy several times. I remember when I was in like elementary school or junior high, like waking up at 4 a.m. to go put on like my taped off TV Star Trek movie. So these are ones I have seen quite a bit.
Sunrise Star Trek. That's what you had. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely remember with the the hand done label in the late '80s doing that more than once. So.
Well, it's also cool because Mark Leonard is in this, and it's people. He played. It was kind of funny after he was the Klingon captain that you barely saw in motion picture. Then the byline was, "Oh, Mark Leonard is the first person in history to play a Klingon, a Romulan, and a Vulcan." Because but people think of Sarek because it was so there, but he was the first Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, and then he was the first modern Klingon it was really a thing for a long, long time. But people think about Sarek being such a dominant character. He only was, the debut in Journey to Babel, and then not motion picture, and not Con of Wrath, but he's in 3 and 4, and then 6.
And then Next Gen.
Yeah. They went, and people loved him, and the fans loved him on the con circuit. Yeah, and then his Next Gen wrap-up, right, 3 times. The one-off, and then the two-parter. All in one he dies in the first part of the Spock Next Gen.
I still, at the end of the day, I still think Balance of Terror is my favorite bit of Mark Leonard in Trek, though.
Balance of Terror is one of my favorite episodes of the original series.
Well, it is an awesome episode, yeah. It's hard for me to get past Journey to Babel being awesome on 4 or 5 levels, and
I also like Silent Run Deep, so that probably helps.
And what was the... Here Come the Brides! No, that's a whole side issue, too. Anyway, which was a sitcom in the dramedy in the States, and anyway, a whole side issue. But no, Mark Leonard it was really sad that he had kidney disease and died a little bit before his time in the 90s, like 96. But he was out on the cons. He was a huge fan favorite for years and years and years. Did the early the fan cruises and a lot of convention. I interviewed him once. One of those first years when I got to start going to cons, like in the 80s, mid 80s. Really nice guy.
It's amusing that he became the sort of a con favorite and such a nice guy, because when he plays these roles, it seems like that would be so beneath Sarek or one of his commanding officers. But he must be a good actor, because it sounds like his real personality was very different from that.
Yeah. And then just real quick, on the Excelsior, James B. Sicking, Esteban, when, you don't get much there. The Excelsior's bridge is so goofy. It's like we turned somebody loose in the 80s to design a Starfleet bridge that's supposed to be high tech, and it just looks kind of like all glowy, smooth panels. But the helmsman or whatever, that's Miguel Ferrer.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that. He has like a line and a half.
Yeah. But he was a big. I mean, he was. His career wasn't obviously what it became later on, very quickly. But he was a Trek fan, so he didn't. That was back when they would like find the Trek fan goobers actors that would come in and do it for a dime. Just because they could say they got.
Christian Slater showing up in 6 for like 2 seconds.
That was supposed to be Janice Rand and supposed to be Grace Lee Whitney's moment, but they gave it to him because he wanted to be in. They thought, Christian Slater's a cameo.
And yeah, she did pop up in this one for a second, didn't she? Sort of on the Star Trek FaceTime or something.
They got her. Yeah, she stands up in the commissary or whatever that is, which was a cool. I remember thinking that was a cool bit, and it was like they just put a wall up and had a big blue screen and ran the model in behind it, and it was awesome. Like they never did stuff like that before. Look, it's a movie. They're spending so much money. Well, not really, but they're at least thinking big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luke, do you want to throw in any other thoughts into the mix on this one?
We kind of touched on it a little bit. So this film was quite a while before Next Gen, right? But the Excelsior looks so much like it was designed to be a stepping stone between TOS and Next Gen.
Yeah, well, it was like came out in, they worked on it in 83 into 84, and then Next Gen's end of 86, and then shot and filmed, premiered in 87. I want to throw one more thing at everybody. Originally, the story that Hard Bennett and Leonard came up with, like Wrath of Khan was so energizing. Leonard totally flipped. Instead of like, you got to kill me off, I don't want anything to do with Star Trek. He was like, oh my God, I can't leave. And he, deigned to do the whole coffin comeback scene at the end. You know, it was an added footage. So the whole thing of 3 kind of just set itself up. But the whole thing about it being Klingons, originally the first story draft that Harvard, it's all Romulans. And Leonard, a lot of people, it's very weird. There's 2 times when people looked at Romulans in a movie and said, oh, Romulans are boring. And this was one of them. The other one was Insurrection in Next Gen Era. It was supposed to be Romulans. And Patrick thought Romulans were boring and made Michael Piller change it to the Son'a and the Baku. And then what happens? The next movie they make, Romulans are key, and then years later Romulans are the first redo Kelvin movie, and then they bring Romulans in for Picard. It's kind of like, no, it's just, it was weird. But they went through and basically just crossed out Romulan and made it Klingon, and then, which is kind of where the Lord came from. But the one thing they didn't do is all the way through the story said Bird of Prey, because that had been the Romulan, a ship name. And they left it in. So this is the movie that gave us this weird, like, why do the Klingons have birds of prey when that was a Romulan thing originally? Well, that's why.
I guess you could have dreadnoughts in more than one navy, so you can have birds of prey in more than one fleet.
Yeah. Anyway, that was just, but that's one of those total fluky things that no one thinks about. And then, 40 years later, they're going, oh, if only somebody had sat there and marked off,
See, to me, Romulans have always been the most interesting Star Trek villains. I won't consider Star Trek finished until they show us Romulan and Vulcan reunite.
That would be, yeah. No, original series, oh yeah. The Klingons were the cardboard, aside from, you got Kor, Kang, and Koloth are like the big 3 for a reason. Kor is kind of like he's chewing the scenery, but he is kind of like the Nazi, the Soviet commissar kind of thing. And then Koloth is just funny, is like, it's like almost mocking the whole Ming of, Mongo kind of thing. And then Kang and his wife and the let's beat the, we'll beat our plowshares into our swords into plowshares is kind of poignant. So, there's a reason they stand alone, but all the rest of the Klingons were just, the bad guy of the week. We need a stand-in guy. And the 2 times you saw Romulans from really different angles bounce to Terra and Enterprise, and we're like, wow. There's like so much assumed about them and people love those characters and wanted to reuse them.
Well, is there really just 2 Romulan episodes in TOS?
And then the stock footage of the ships in Deadly Years, yeah.
Wow.
See?
But yeah, they made such an impression.
Well, they were kind of more of the next gen villains in the end. Now that the Klingons were not.
Before the Borg came along, yeah. The ones that every generation they come in and it's like the end of Bounds of Terror. It's like, well, Captain, in another reality, I could have called you friend, and at the end of the chase, the Romulan looks at, Picard and says, well, maybe someday we can get together, hang out. And in Nemesis, the Romulans are working with them to beat Shinzon. And it's kind of like, so close and so far away. And then to see what unspools on Picard has been kind of interesting too. So that's a totally unfinished book.
Yeah, Luke was asking a leading question there. That's how he wanted Picard to end.
Yeah. Well, that's just how I feel like Star Trek should end, if it ever does.
Well, that they reunite and then what? Vulcan leaves I mean, that's been the premise. That's been a thread in 2 or 3 of those pitches that people were doing all through the fallow times when there was no Star Trek and people were throwing out their ideas. More than one of them had Vulcan Romulans get together and Vulcan leaves the Federation and everybody's got their panties in a wad over it, and that's like one of the touchstones of where the new drama, landscape starts with. So anyway, it'll be fun to see. It'll be fun to see how they finish up what they've done with them, but not to make this all suddenly about Romulans who were not part of
Yeah.
They almost were. Anyway, as I say, I actually do have to catch a train to work soon. So, Larry, you've got so many things on your plate. I did your intro, and I didn't even mention your, Portal 47 or some of the other things. So, where should people go looking for you these days?
Well, the best place is still LarryNemecek.com, and yeah, Portal 47, I say it's our mini-con all year long. So hello, welcome to the rest of the world that zooms along now. We've been doing it for 5 years and had people around the world doing, backstage voices and people that worked on the shows that you won't see in a magazine or on a convention stage, and things out of my collection and my archives too, and roundtables. It's really a fun thing. We have people from around the world that do it in different sessions. We have live events, live online, and all that. But when we're able to travel and go out into the world without COVID, I do Trekland Treks, which is tours of LA area film sites from Star Trek. And that's on hold, obviously, right now. But I've got the Trek files. Thank you for being a Trekophile.
You're welcome.
And and on Tuesdays I have a live Facebook show called Trekland Tuesdays Live at 1 Pacific or 4 Eastern. And on Saturday, the newest thing I do, I'm so proud of this, is Dr. Ali Matu and Dr. Trek, and one of us is a real doctor, but it's called Life Support Live, and we call it Boldly Going Through Uncertain Times, but it's a mashup of Star Trek and mental health. And it's not grim and dreary. We have a lot of fun, but between the two of us, we geek out on a theme every week with a specific episode or 2 or 3 or character, and then have some, under that theme, like anxiety or sleep or prejudice or, whatever, and the whole gamut of things. And especially things we started during COVID times, and then we had all the racial justice upheaval, and now we've got, so much is just dragging, 2020. What can I say? And it's really been fun to do it, and a lot of people have really responded well. We send people off with a few. It's not heavy, like I said, but people have some, daily life tips from Ali, and I'm really proud that it was going to be a panel based on Picard at WonderCon, and when everything blew up and got canceled, we said, let's make it into a podcast and keep it going, and that's what we're doing. So yeah, you can see it all at LarryNemecek.com, and Larry Nemecek on Twitter.
Nice.
All right, no, it's been very groovy talking to you today. I guess just real quick, Luke, do you want to give your podcast shouts?
Oh, I was happy to skip our plugs if you've got to go, but
okay, I've got a couple.
I just like
to.
If you want to listen to me talk about Pokemon, you can find my podcast. Go on Twitter at LukeLoveSPKMN. It's also on iTunes and everything. If you like the music you heard in this podcast, you can find Matt's music online at rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com. If you like this podcast, you want to get in contact with us, we're on Twitter at MLSFS50, and you can find us on Facebook. Just search Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
All I was going to do was try and spit out the layers of our podcast again, which I always fail at. So
because that takes you 20 minutes, so you would miss your train.
Wow, I want to hear you do the legal line at the bottom. That was amazing.
He'll have to make that one up. Yeah. Side effects of this podcast may be, I don't know, internal hemorrhaging. See, I can't do it fast.
No, but seriously, guys, I don't want you to miss your train. But thanks for having me on, and thanks for, letting me enjoy your style.
Many thanks coming out. Diving deep into some of that stuff, because there is one that people, it's kind of like it's a good platform just to get into Trek, basically. Because, there's only so much of the movie, but there's so many things around it. So it's a nice one to have this chat.
Well, and 10, 15 years ago, I thought, this is all getting so old. The things that I, was a fan through, and the things I saw firsthand, all the 90s and the aughts at Paramount. And still a lot do, work with people and things, but the background, behind the scenes stuff. But it's it's going to get old and dusty and no one cares. And then it's the last 18 years, it's holy shit, the people, how does anybody who was born in the 90s or the aughts know all this stuff? It's I just oh, this is so old. It's out there. Now it's online. Everybody knows this stuff. It's no, people don't know and they want to know. And we're still digging out new anyway. So, it's been really interesting that the tech revolution, the digital revolution and podcasting, and that we can talk long distance around the world live on camera.
Yeah, this is our convention now.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you. Luke, what should Larry and our dear listeners do?
Well, Larry, you and the listeners, I have now had enough of you.
Trek well, guys.
All right, cheers.
Next week, the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
after I realized we were just kind of going in circles, I went, okay, and you guys didn't stop me. I was like, okay, well, we'll get down to this.
We're not one to stop anyone.
We're being very prophecy here. We're not going very linear.
Oh yeah, that's fine. We did our little plot at the start, and after that, we don't really care.
Yeah.
we don't bring a guest on to not let them talk.
Oh, well, you better not with me, boy. I will, it's amazing. I tell everybody the Trek Files, like, yes, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's like, no, I'm serious, 15, 20 minutes. That's not been my history.